Hi, everyone. My name is Alexandra Hudson. Thank you so much for being here, a part of this virtual summit on politics, faith, and civility. I'm thrilled to have my very dear friend, Cherie Harder, talk with us about these important themes today. I'll introduce her just before we get into our conversation. So Cherie serves as president of the Trinity Forum. And prior to joining the Trinity Forum in 2008, Ms. Harder served in the White House as Special Assistant to the President and Director of Policy and Projects for the First Lady, Laura Bush. Earlier in her career, she served as policy advisor to Senate Majority Leader Bill First, advising the leader on domestic and social issues and serving as liaison and outreach director to outside groups. She was also a senior counselor to the chairman of the National Endowment for the Humanities, where she helped the chairman design and launch the We the People initiative to enhance the teaching, study, and understanding of American history. She also served as a policy director for Senator Sam Brownback, and also served as deputy policy director at Empower America. She holds a BA in government from Harvard University and a postgraduate diploma in literature from the University of Queensland in Brisbane, Australia, where she was a Rotary Scholar. Oh, that's great. I didn't know that, Cherie. I was a Rotary Scholar too. That's wonderful. Oh. In London. She is also a senior fellow at Cardis, an editorial board member of Comment Magazine, a past board member of Gordon College and the C.S. Lewis Institute, and a current board member of the Convergent Center for Policy Resolution, Faith, and Law, and an advisory board member for the National Museum of American Religion. So Cherie, thank you for being here.
Great to be here and good to see you, Lexi.
You were one of the first people we thought of, Cherie, when Erica and I were planning this occasion. You're someone that has a strong grounding in faith, but have served in public life. Mm-hmm. And so I thought I'd just open to explore what do you see as the natural intersection overlap of these topics, civility, faith, and politics? Mm-hmm. And then maybe even explore, what is politics?
Oh, yeah. No, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's always good to talk with you, Lexi, even if it's before an audience or over Zoom or whatever it is. So anyway, it's great to be here. And yes, I do think there's clearly a natural nexus in some ways between faith and politics, and that the Christian tradition of which I'm coming from, and which colors or shapes my worldview, the two great commandments that Jesus gave to his followers were to love God and love your neighbor. And so a lot of what we bring to the public square as people of faith is thinking through, what does it mean to love one's neighbor, and how does that play out? And there's a lot of implications for the command to love one's neighbor in terms of what justice means, what freedom means, what civility means. What does it look like to pursue and work towards a just social order? So there's going to be a lot of areas of nexus there. Another one has to do with, who are we? What does it mean to say that I am a Christian and I am an American, as well as all the other different forms of identity one has? And of course, a third area is, our faith presumably affects our behavior, not only what we do, but how we do it and why we do it. It affects all sorts of different parts of what makes us live our public lives, not just our private and personal ones. So all of those, I think, are part of why there is a nexus between faith and politics. One of the things that's quite concerning right now is to see how a natural nexus of the ordering of one's priorities, the effect of faith on a mandate for justice and a mandate for loving others, has gotten distorted in some significant ways, and I think is leading to real harm. And we can talk about that, but just to throw out a few different statistics kind of reflecting that, there have been a number, or quite a few surveys, polls sort of showing changes in attitudes. But some recent polls have shown that close to 40% of Americans, sort of evenly divided on the two polls, consider people of the other party to be evil. There's around 20% of partisans on either side who have said that the country would be better off if large numbers of the opposite party died. And there's nearly a third of people who have, again, different polls and studies, have said that violence against the government is sometimes justified. I think all of this points to real distortions and breakdowns of what should be a healthy nexus of faith and politics. That is a motivation out of love, both vertical, towards God, but horizontal towards a neighbor, that should lead us to pursue the common good and pursue justice, and instead is increasingly causing people. It's fueling and motivating political combat as opposed to a pursuit of the common good. And we can talk about how we got there and what it might mean, but those are just a few thoughts about what the nexus should be or could be, and some of the distortions I think are taking place.
I love that question you posed to kind of take a step back. I'd like to ask the question of the intersection of these themes, faith, politics, and civility, requires the question, who are we as Christians? And I think that we could even take that one step further. Who are we as human beings? Like, what is the stuff of humanity? What is the origin, purpose, and destiny of man? What is the stuff? What is it? And as Christians, what is the imago Dei, and what does that mean for how we view ourselves and view the other? Even the other that we disagree with, that we think is vehemently wrong, even if they hold evil views, what do we owe them? What is the bare minimum of respect and decency we owe the person that we disagree with, despite that disagreement? And to some extent, that's the fundamental question of human civilization, coming together and doing this thing called life together, despite differences. Right, like that's and then of course that's even a pre-Christian question. How do we do life together despite the difference? And then the Christian valence just elevates the standards, and the stakes are heightened. You can't just cavalierly take a life of the enemy tribe, right? Like in the post-Christian era, like, no, you have to reckon with the fact that they have the imprint of the divine, just like we do, and we have more in common than not. And what does that mean? So I think that's a great question. Thank you for starting us there, Cherie. So what is the problem? How did we get here? How did the stakes become so high in our public life, where all of a sudden people feel like, as you've mentioned, the world would be a better place without people that held views that are different than mine?
Yeah.
Have we always been here, yeah.
Well, actually, to your question, have we always been here? I think one of the geniuses of the founders is that there was a certain human anthropology kind of embedded within the Constitution. And one doesn't even have to say this was biblically rooted. You could certainly say it's compatible with an orthodox kind of Christian understanding, which was it both acknowledged the dignity of each person, while also acknowledging that we are beings that are prone to selfishness. And often, we favor the way we see the world. And so that's, the checks and balances that are part of the Constitution kind of acknowledge that it is a good thing for power and authority to be checked, because it is unwise to trust human nature at scale to wisely wield power. But at the same time, recognizes the dignity of people. And of course, one of the failings is that it did not go far enough, but it planted the seeds for those reforms to happen. But so back to your question, like, where have we gotten? How have we gotten here? I think there's a lot that could be said, but a few things I'll mention. One is, I think in many ways, and somewhat ironically, we actually place far too much faith in politics to answer or to address the big challenges and the big questions of life. Niebuhr, it was a theologian, Reinhold Niebuhr, who talked about politics as being proximate solutions to insoluble problems. And again, that's rooted in a certain view of human nature that, again, acknowledges that we are selfish beings, and we have motivations that are probably not even known to ourselves. And there's always going to be more needs than resources, probably more legitimate claims to resources that than can be satisfied. And so part of the challenge of what politics is determining priorities within a system, a structure of justice, ordered liberty. And that sounds easy, but it's very hard to achieve. And part of what enables us to do better and better is that clash of ideas and trying to persuade other people and listening to each other and learning from each other. And that collaborative process hopefully will get us closer and closer. But I think, recently we've been putting more and more of our sense of self and identity, not just in politics, but in partisanship, which is it has happened several times in history. It is rarely, or it is never a good thing. There have been some studies that have shown that it used to be the norm to marry, or at least very normal, to marry outside of your political party, but highly unusual to marry outside of your faith. And that has been the case for quite a long time. But in the last 10 years, that's actually reversed. It's now much more common for people to marry outside of their faith than outside of their political party. In many ways, one's religion was considered one of the unmoved movers of identity. That is, it would shape your sense of identity or your sense of affiliation in other areas. Increasingly, that is not the case. Partisanship is starting to supplant theological and religious orientation as one of the grounding forms of identity. And that, I think, is a real loss and a real danger, to have partisanship displace what should be a far deeper claim upon our loves and our priority and our sense of self. And winds up distorting a lot, not only of our faith, but also distorting our politics. Mm-hmm. I think a second cause, and one that has fed into the first, is that because of changes in technology, we are able to have our own information streams increasingly custom tailored to our likes, our interests, but also our grievances and our biases. So our information streams are increasingly not only personalized, but also politicized. And when you factor in the human tendency to motivated reasoning, those personalized, politicized information streams are increasingly confused with what is true, such that it's ever easier to consider people who don't agree with oneself to be, if not stupid, but just downright evil. And I also think, as part of both of those things, we have gotten an increased sense of our purpose from political combat. With more of our identities being based in partisanship, what we see as not only right or wrong, but also true or false, real or unreal, being shaped by personalized and politicized information streams, more of us are getting a sense of what our calling is from essentially combat with those who hold a different view. And I think all three of those things are distorting, not destroying civility, and distorting both our faith and our politics.
I think you're absolutely right that part of the issue is that we see the people with opposing views as we've been talking about, less like us, and less impossible to reason with, impossible to grapple with. I thank you for bringing that Niebuhr. That's such a beautiful phrase. I'll just repeat it. Politics says proximate solutions to insoluble problems, and instead people wanting everything right now or nothing. Otherwise, you're the enemy. If I'm not getting everything I want in this exact moment. and that everything is kind of cheapened, reduced to this sort of cheapened simplicity, where it's either you're on my side or you're not. You're good or bad, and all these, like, life is just a series of litmus tests. Are you a Christian or aren't you? If you don't vote this way, you're not a Christian. If you don't vote this, if you're not, this, and it's just reduced to, like, tenets and platforms, as opposed to, and then as a result, we are essentialized, and we essentialize others by that view of the world, as opposed to seeing, again, one another as beings with the imprint of the divine, infinitely complex people that come to view the world for many different reasons, right? Like, there's a story behind every opinion we hold, everything we've done, everything we've said, for good or for ill.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And so often too, it seems like people, they're the online warriors. If you're not only with them 100%, but also just as belligerent or as assertive about pushing your point of view, then you're a coward and a sellout, right? Or your silence is deafening. So not only does one have to be 100% with the political belligerence, but any kind of reticence of being equally combative is seen as cowardice or being a sellout. And I think that's a dangerous trend.
And simply not having an opinion or a strong opinion on something is no longer an option, which is so bad for our public discourse. Like, everyone feels the need to comment on everything constantly. Not everyone's qualified to. No one has thoughtful things to say 5 times a day or 20 times a day, every day of the week. Like, that goes for columnists or the average, tweeter, person tweeting on the interweb. Cherie, my final chapter, I cannot wait. So Cherie, I'll disclaim, as a gracious endorser of this project. She's been a long supporter and friend, and I can't wait for you to send you a copy of the book, Cherie. I'm
looking forward to it.
But my final chapter is on misplaced meaning and forgiveness, these exact topics that we've been talking about. I don't know if you're familiar with this lovely essay by a Scottish theologian named Thomas Chalmers. It's called The Expulsive Power of a New Affection. Is that a great title? We don't have essays with those kind of titles anymore these days. But he argues, he has this certain ecology of the soul. He says nature abhors a vacuum. And he's a Christian, right? So he's talking about it's a Christian theological view that it's not enough just to say, stop loving sin, right? Like, stop loving bad things that are causing you harm and misery in your life. You can't just say stop. You have to cultivate a new love. Good. Absolutely. You have to cultivate those attachments and cultivate a love of the beautiful, the good, the true, love of the divine, to displace and to weaken our attachment and the seduction of the harm and of the sin, of the bad in our lives. So you can't just say, don't love politics so much, right? Like, that's how that applies. That's the analogy I apply to this world. Like, we've misplaced our meaning in politics. Exactly what you said, as these traditional touchstones of meaning, like friendship, like community, like faith, as they have been the ascendant in recent decades. Nature abhors a vacuum, right? We've misplaced our meaning in something temporal, something ephemeral, and we're bound to be disappointed in that. And so and there was a great book called Overdoing Democracy by a political scientist at Vanderbilt University, and I love his framework, because he says, in making everything political, which we have, we're doing democracy a disservice. There's such a thing as, we need things in our life that give us life, that are apolitical, so we could just be people, right? Be co-citizens, and not have everything be these litmus tests, these mortal battles, to use your phraseology that I love. And so I really like that sort of framework. And then the remainder of my chapter goes through, what are some things that we can reclaim in life to restore our soul? So I talk about friendship, especially cultivating friendship across divide, right? To combat this crisis of alienation that we were talking about a moment ago. I talk about curiosity, nurturing our minds, and just finding things that excite us, and just following an intellectual trend. I talk about beauty, encountering the sublime, right? Taking nature walks, looking up at the stars at night, things that instill awe in us and a sense of transcendence, and put us into perspective as human beings, and make our tiny little problems feel small as they really are. Right? Like, keep our egos in check. So I just really appreciate you bringing that up, because we're definitely on the same brainwave there. So what do you think, Cherie? I've offered a few thoughts of what we can do, but what else can we do you think?
Well, along the same vein, but perhaps worded a little bit differently and a little bit different conceptually, I want to also offer the idea of hospitality,
Mm-hmm.
including intellectual hospitality, which you sort of hinted at there. But so much of what we've talked about, the thinning of our sort of sense of identity to be so largely partisan, all of that has led to kind of like the breakdown of relationship and the fragmentations of friendships and thinning out of community bonds that you've also kind of alluded to, and all of that kind of leads to loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
And loneliness is terrible for a just society. It is a complete acid that corrodes and distorts essentially the civic fabric that kind of undergirds and weaves together a disparate people. So with that kind of loneliness, one of the best antidotes to it, is relationality. And the way relationality largely starts is through the extension of friendship or hospitality. And in many ways, hospitality seems like, a modest effort, something that's often, kind of dismissed as what church ladies do. But, opening one's home, offering one's time and attention, and considering the viewpoints of someone else is the necessary, if insufficient, but the necessary first step, I think, towards reweaving some of that civic fabric, seeing other people as full people, who are themselves filled with dignity. And as you were talking about, have a story and have a perspective, have reasons for what they think, even if those reasons aren't great ones. But there's often the story behind it is one that, once discovered, can be the basis for a friendship, even if not an agreement. And we've got to the point where we tend to consider, for some reason, political agreement to be more important than a deep bond of friendship. We won't be friends with everyone, but hospitality is what opens the door to those kind of relationships, both starting and strengthening. And I think it's no coincidence that, again, studies have shown that the number of times that we open our doors to our neighbors or friends has gone way down in recent years. And I think it's one of those practices that, once revived, will start gradually but surely helping to rebuild some of the civic bonds and help us to actually be able to hear each other, even when what we're hearing might not be something that we agree with.
I think that's so beautiful and well put, Cherie. I think especially in the post-pandemic era, it's hard to get motivated. I think it's like hospitality and empathy and interacting with others. It's like a social muscle that kind of atrophied during this time of just isolation. We had these sort of mediated interactions virtually all the time, but it's not quite the same as being in the aura and the presence of someone else. And so as we try to build up those muscles again, it's so easy to find excuses not to when there's loungewear and Netflix. Why would I go out? Why would I come in? We can find excuses, but how do it's like going to the gym. I like to say, like, we never regret it. Very rarely do we regret like an evening spent with people out in our homes at someone else's home, because those are transformative. They build trust. They're beautiful moments in time that you'll never get back. I completely agree. I have a whole chapter on hospitality in my book as a practical and noble expression of civility. And I love etymology. Etymology is throughout my book. You probably know this, at the root of the word hospitality is the Latin word hospice, which means both host and guest. And hospice is the root of the word hospitality, as we know, which is like love of the stranger. That's kind of the intellectual lineage, but also the root of hostile. And that kind of shows the duality of hospitality, right? There's kind of a risk involved when you invite someone into your home, into your life. Or you mentioned an intellectual hospitality. When you invite someone's ideas into your life, there's kind of a risk involved. Like, is this going to be a good gamble or isn't it, right? But the another root Another word that derives from hospice is hospital. So hospitality and hospital are from the same etymological link. And I love this vision of creating our lives and our homes as social hospitals, right? That's what hospitality can do, as you mentioned, repairing and healing our social fabric, one interaction at a time. You mentioned offline, Cherie, that's where, social healing begins, and that can't be scaled. No one can snap their fingers. No public policy can make it a national, thing, right? It's spontaneous, it's beautiful, it's isolated, individualized, and but so powerful. I know you live your life that way, Cherie, and I admire you for that. So I'm so grateful that we're friends, and I'm so grateful to have shared this little moment in time with you to talk about these beautiful and important ideas. And I'm so grateful for your friendship and for being here.
Well, thank you, Lexi. It's great to talk with you. I really appreciate the invitation and delighted to be a part of this.
Thank you.